It's a long time coming, but I finally saw The Flash starring Ezra Miller and a bunch of cameos from the current and former DC universe. And my gut reaction to it was that is a silly movie, more like in terms of tone, the Suicide Squad than any other movie in the DCEU. It doesn't really fit in the kind of the Snyder murderverse that was kind of created by Man of Steel and Batman vs Superman, even the first Aquaman movie. None of those really fit with uh the tone of this movie. This movie, even Justice League, a little bit maybe because the obviously Ezra Miller's Flash is in Justice League, but even then he kind of seemed out of place. This movie was closer to the TV show The Flash, which I saw and liked a fair amount, than it is any of the DCU movies, except maybe the Suicide Squad, which is even that's a little bit darker than this. Even the second one, not the first one, the second one that was done by James Gunn. Even that one I think was a little bit more serious. This one is very it has a darkness to it, but what's good about it is the light parts. And when it tries to go dark, it's more eye rolling than anything else. So that's my general gist of it. Now, how good it is, we'll get into that. But that was my general take from it. Is if you watch this movie, you take nothing else from this video, take from that this is not a movie that really fits at all with the tone of the DCEU. It's kind of the representing almost the end of it, but it's almost like an offshoot. And once I tell you about the people that made it, that's going to make a bit more sense. So the director, it's interesting. So this is quite a kind of strange team of writer and director. So the director is a man named Andy Muschietti. He directed, his big break was directing the horror movie Mama. And that's the one where there's like the little girl in the house and she's talking about her mama. And I guess in the trailer, eventually the trailer reveals her mama's a monster or something. That movie, that was this guy's like big break. I never saw that one. I've seen plenty of slasher and horror movies, but I didn't see that one. That's his guy's big break. Then he did both of the It and It Part 2 movies, which I liked to some extent, both of those. He did those. That's kind of his portfolio. He's done some other stuff too, but those are things that stood out for me when I looked at what he's done. That Mama was his break, and then It and It Part 2. The screenwriter was a woman named Christina Hodson. Her big break was, I think, Bumblebee, which I think is probably the best Transformer movie, at least in my opinion, was a Transformer movie I enjoy watching the most. My daughter liked it a lot. She actually one of the few movies she has on her bookcase as part of her kind of collection that she has of movies, which will probably never get that big now that they're going to stop selling them in a few years everywhere. But that's one of the few movies that is big for her. We saw the one after that, which wasn't as good, but Bumblebee was very good. She wrote that. She also, I think, from Bumblebee, got an opportunity in the DCEU or the DC, movies universe. She wrote Birds of Prey, the Harlequin, the kind of movie, the Tales of Harlequin movie, which had very mixed reviews. So I kind of liked that movie a little bit more than some people did. I thought it was kind of enjoyable enough for what it was. The biggest problem I had with it was the third act. I thought wasn't that good. I thought the kind of the final set piece and stuff was kind of goofy. But a lot of the other stuff, because I'm a big Margot Robbie fan, and I dug what she was trying to do with it, and I had a fairly good time with it. So seeing her on it doesn't surprise me. However, what I think it did, their combination, was it created kind of a strain because in her, a lot of the dialogue, you can tell comes from someone that wrote Bumblebee and Birds of Prey. But on the other hand, the movie, there are a lot of sequences of the movie that look more like in kind of color and tone more like It or Mama. But it doesn't really work because the dialogue and the overall story kind of overtake that. Having said that, if you take nothing else away from The Flash, first take away the fact that the tone doesn't really match the DCEU. The second thing not to take away from it is the CGI is hideous. This is the worst CGI since we're talking like Marvel pre-Avengers. I think it's because there was so much of it that they had to go in the cheap. But all the characters look like little rubber men bouncing around. You can't take any of the action scenes seriously. There's CGI on people's faces. They de-aged Ron Livingston, who plays the Flash's father. They de-aged him, which I think wasn't even necessary. Just put some base on him or something, and you're good. But I think they CGI'd his face to like make him look younger, and it's terrible. It's unnecessary. But there's CGI in every scene. They're probably what is that? I heard that in-game had 2,000 CGI shots in it. That sounds about right for this. This might even be more. This might be 3,000 CGI shots. They're all over the movie. I think in the scene where he's in his costume is CGI. I'm not even sure if his costume is real. His costume may be completely CGI. There's one scene where he's in a jet and you see his face, and his face, it seems like it's pushing out of his. I might be careful, I mess up my mic, but his face is almost mashing out of his mask. Like the CGI, they messed it up and put the mask too deep in his face, so it feels like the bottom of his face is pushing out of the mask. Like it's so weird. So the CGI is absolutely horrendous in this movie, and there are people that will ruin the entire movie for them. It didn't for me, but it's a huge hit. And so you're watching this movie, and within about 10, 15 minutes, because early in the movie, there's somebody with a cape. The cape is hideous. It looks terrible. It looks so fake. It looks worse than the capes in like The Dark Knight or even other DCEU movies like Justice League or Batman vs Superman. It looks worse than that. It looks absolutely terrible. And so you get 15, 20 minutes of this movie and you know it's not going to be that good. The only question is how bad it's going to be. Is it worth sitting through? That's how quickly you get to this movie at this point. I'm dipping into my acts a little bit. So let me go back and talk about the movie and the story a little bit. But the first act, I'll tell you that the first act is subpar, and it starts making you doubt whether or not you should continue to watch the movie. The whole, the initial action. It starts up with the action sequence pretty early on. That, as long with the character stuff as well, it's a mess, and it makes you challenge. It makes you think about not watching it anymore. Anyway, let me roll back a little bit. What's the Flash about? So, as we know from some of the previous DCEU movies, or if you read any Flash comic books, his father was put in jail for killing his mom, and he believes his father's innocent. He knows his father's innocent. And so the movie starts off with the father's case looking to be probably hopeless, and the likelihood of his father is not going to be able to get out of jail and will be stuck in jail. Now, one thing I'll say this about the way they did the Flash, the origin is, at least of the murder, that part of the origin, is they have the son kind of witness almost to his father's innocence. That is to say, he hears his mom screaming, and as far as a time frame, it seems almost impossible for the father to have done. I mean, it's possible. He doesn't literally witness his father not do it, but the way they show it in the movie, it doesn't look as if it's even really possible. It would have been like his dad had to be the Flash or almost for it to happen. Like it's barely, so there's almost no doubt. And to me, if there's almost no doubt, one thought that crossed my mind is just break him out of jail. You're the Flash. You know he's innocent. Just break him out of jail. He steals from other people on the street. Like he commits crimes that are, minor crimes, obviously, like stealing stuff, and stealing a hot dog or a candy bar. Although he asked one person for a candy bar, but he steals someone else's food. So those ethics are a little bit flexible. But clearly your father's innocent. If you know it for almost 100% fact, just take him out of jail. Was Batman gonna track you down? I don't think so. You know what I'm saying? He knows you didn't do it. Maybe he would. It'd be Batman versus Flash. I don't know. But to me, it seems like he could just break him out of jail and just take him home. So anyway, that was one thought that crossed my mind once I saw how they showed it in the movie. I'm like, come on, man. Anyway, so back to the story from the trailer and from the first act. So he sees this and says, I want to do something about it. And then he discovers kind of organically, which is also kind of goofy. He just discovers he can go back in time, not really on purpose. He just gets upset, then finds himself a little bit in the past. Says, oh wow, I can go in the past, which is like, really, like, is that easy? That's a little bit. I guess they had to do it that way because Ezra Miller plays the Flash very young, but it's kind of ridiculous. He stumbles into going back in time. But anyway, that's what happens, and that's where I'm gonna leave it off. That's about 10 minutes into the movie, and I don't want to do spoilers. So he decides to go back, as you know from the trailer. He decides to go back in time and uh, uh, prevent it from happening, and that sets off what is essentially a time travel movie. That's what The Flash basically is. It's a movie. And they make references to Back to the Future, and it's more like Back to the Future than anything else. Kind of in tone as much as anything else, but in terms of timelines and trying to fix this, or Butterfly Effect. It's kind of like almost a mashup of like Butterfly Effect and I don't know, Superman. I don't know, or a mashup of Butterfly Effect in a superhero movie. I'll just say that. That's what it's the most like. So that's the movie you're getting when you go in there. For performances, let me talk about performances real quick. Then I'll go to the acts and kind of what I saw, what I came away from the movie from. So for performances, I did not like Ezra Miller as Flash very much. People talked about using the actor from the TV show, and I was all for that. I was like, yeah, use that dude because I liked him in the Flash TV show. But I have to say, in this movie, Ezra Miller playing, he ultimately, and you see this in the trailers, he plays two versions of himself. He does a really good job. I was a little bit impressed, even though I think strange person in real life. I was a little bit impressed by his performances in this movie. So I have to say that he's got good comic timing, I think, and I have to say, like, yeah, his performance was pretty good. Um, what else we have here? So I think Sasha Cally played Supergirl. She doesn't have a lot to do. She's pretty to look at. She does okay, but there's not a lot to really do with there. The guy plays Zod. He's cool. Michael, I think it's Michael Shannon. Um, Let me see. Ron Livingston plays his dad. I mentioned that. He's okay. Oh, but the big thing is this: Michael Keaton kills as Batman. Michael Keaton does such a good job. Michael Keaton is saved this movie from being in my bottom tier. I'll go ahead and say that. It's not in my bottom tier, and that's because of Michael Keaton and a little bit of Ezra Miller. He has one or two scenes where he kills it as both flashes, but Michael Keaton does a better job than this movie deserved. He does it really good and his acting performance is excellent. And to me, it makes the movie worth seeing just because of that. Ezra Miller stuff is cool. I don't know if that quite would have gotten it out of the bottom tier by itself. Michael Keaton does it, despite the other flaws I'm going to talk about more in a minute. But he is really, really good, and it makes it. I'm so glad that they put him in this movie, even though they made a lot of mistakes otherwise. He's really good. Let's talk about act structure. So the first act, as I said, subpar, has an opening action sequence, which is kind of boring, doesn't really work. There's a pieces of it that are okay, but overall, it's kind of blah and it goes on too long. Besides that, a lot of the other setup is okay, but it's unremarkable. Some of the family stuff you see in the third act, you see his father, and he meets goes his father in prison. That's okay. There's some other family stuff pretty soon after that you see in the trailer of him meeting his mom, who's not dead, obviously, at that point. And it works. It's okay, but it's not anything. If anything, it's a little below average. It's a little eye rolling. The whole family dynamic stuff, like going for him. He's so happy to see his mom. Doesn't really work that well. Um, but then we get kind of in the second act, and we get the two Ezras, and they play off each other. And even though you could almost tell in every scene which Ezra was the real one and which one was the CGI one that was put into the scene, it still works for the most part. The Ezra and Ezra scenes, the two scenes that work are the Ezra in this movie. There are essentially two scenes that work. The Ezra and Ezra scenes work, and the Michael Keaton scenes work. That's about it. Any scene that's not one of those two things doesn't work. There's a girl that plays like his crush from college. She's in a few scenes. She has nothing to do. Nothing wrong with her, but she really has nothing to do. Um, but those are essentially the two, and most of those scenes are in the second act, which is quite enjoyable. And I was watching the second act thinking, wow, is this movie going to come back and actually be good? So it had me doubting my doubts at some point in the second act. But then the third act happened. And once you kind of realize where it's going, and it's in the second or third act, but you know there's a big action sequence and there's pieces of it in the trailer. That's not very good, and people have poked holes in certain aspects of it, but it's kind of half dull. Again, there's more dull action sequences. There's a couple action moments that are okay, but considering how much time they spent on these heavily CGI'd action sequences, most of them are boring, and you're jarred out of it by all the bad CGI. Pretty big mess. So that stuff's kind of going on in the third act as well as in the second act. And then once you kind of realize the type of ending they're going to do, it's kind of an eye rolling thing. It's really it's not satisfying for me at least. It's okay. Again, Ezra Miller does a little something that kind of helps save it towards the end. There's a good moment later on that acting wise, like a well done moment that saves it a little bit, but not enough. There's too much of this movie that is, if not unwatchable, barely watchable, and very little that you write home about or take away from it. Again, aside from Michael Keaton, and 2 or 3 Ezra Miller and Ezra Miller dual flash scenes. Those were the highlights of it. The rest of it you can kind of throw in the garbage pan. So coming away from the movie, I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 10. It's at the low end of the mid tier. I don't regret watching it. To me, the bottom tier is essentially movies I regret watching unless they're so bad they're funny, which is this weird anomaly that makes it hard to grade movies because they're movies that are actually pretty enjoyable because they're so terrible, like The Room. But this isn't that. This is more so just inept and kind of a mess with a few highlights uh, by a few performances and some decent writing at points. But it's pretty low, and I'm kind of glad I waited and didn't rush to see it. I think my gut was right on that because that's one of the reasons why I see almost every superhero movie that comes out just about in the last 20 years. This one took me, what, 6 months to watch? There's a reason for that. So that's my takeaway from this. If you got this far, I appreciate you watching. Please consider liking and subscribing, and look for more videos from Low Key Classic Movies, including streams every Monday. Thanks for watching.